old EU countries, and in particular to Germany. Some German deliveries managed to repair this damage done, like the deliveries of German Panzerhaubitze 2000, these self-propelled howitzers. But I'm afraid that it is not as good now, like the perception of especially Germany and France, as it could have been. Regarding the last visits to the US or the last statements, we can see pretty different developments on the field. On one hand, I totally agree with Alex that the visit of Ukraine's First Lady, Ms. Zelenska, was very important, and it was a very moving part. But the tensions we can see currently between Ukraine and some representatives of the Republican Party, and the very unwise, I would put it that way, statements by some Ukrainian politicians like Tishchenko or others, who have fiercely criticized and personally attacked those in the US who questioned the logic of weapon deliveries to Ukraine. We can analyze this criticism differently, and I personally believe that there is absolutely no reason to be afraid about about what will happen with the weapons the US or other countries delivered to Ukraine. But it is impossible to answer this criticism or this skepticism with personal insults towards the US politicians, what, for example, Mr. Tishchenko has done. So from this perspective, we can see different developments on different fields. We see that Ukrainian government still was not that ready to address all the fears of the US. Think about the situation around of the head of presidential office, Mr. Yermak, or, for example, with some oligarchs. Although there are like some developments here, we have seen today this decree by President Zelensky on the citizenship of some persons in Ukraine, and this can be seen as a very positive development on combating US fears about like some corruption.
You should highlight this a little bit more in detail, Sergey, because not everyone in the space, especially in the US, may have looked at this. I think it's a very intricate position, but it's important for people to know.
There is like an ultimate hammer that people can use trying to destroy the basis under the idea to deliver weapons to Ukraine or to deliver any support to Ukraine. And this hammer calls anti-corruption fight. Ukraine was smeared for years as obviously a very corrupt country, which I believe Ukraine is not. I lived in both Russia and Ukraine, and I can say, if you compare Ukraine with Russia, you would never call Ukraine a corrupt country. Or even like many European countries, as I am a German citizen, and I always say a country which has its former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder should better be silent about corruption or allegedly corruption in other countries. But this idea that Ukraine is corrupt and therefore any support for Ukraine should not be done before Ukraine fights corruption to the end, although it is not defined what does it mean to fight corruption to the end. This idea was very popular in some Western countries. So now we have a situation when we have vocal voices in the US and in some other countries which say that there are like persons who are questionable in Ukrainian government and in influential circles around President Zelensky, and these persons are maybe corrupt, and they should be removed. And one of the persons who is being called or named by these voices is the head of the administration of President Zelensky, Mr. Yermak. and he's also stays under criticism in Ukraine. And other people are, for example, the oligarch and very rich person who stays close to President Zelensky, Mr. Igor Kolomoisky, and some other people who are pretty rich. So during the last days, we have not seen any development or attacks from Zelensky towards Yermak. Quite the opposite. Many says that after the removal of the General State Attorney Venediktova and the head of SBU Bakanov, the position of Yermak have improved. But yesterday, I believe, or today in the morning, I can be wrong now with timing, Zelensky has published his decree removing the citizenship from several persons. And here we can say that it was today. And here we can say that Ukrainian legislation says that a person may not have another citizenship if he has or she a Ukrainian passport. This rule has been ignored by many for years, and the government has tolerated it. So many people knew that this politician or another politician has passport of Russia or of Hungary or of other neighboring nations, and this was just ignored. Like no legal steps have been done against them. But today, President Zelensky has stripped off Ukrainian citizenship for several persons in Ukraine, and one of them is Igor Kolomoisky, who is the richest person in Ukraine, or one of the richest persons, and who many believed was a person who has supported presidential campaign of Volodymyr Zelensky in 2019, and was believed to be one of the persons very closely connected to Zelensky. And Kolomoisky was also like some sort of allergen for many US politicians. So here we can suppose that this step by Zelensky has been done because Zelensky tried not to attack Kolomoisky for many months. And many believe that this is because of his like special connections to Kolomoisky. And now this attack on him, together with other oligarchs and political actors, can be interpreted as if Zelensky wants to demonstrate towards the US that he is very serious about the US fears and criticism, and that he's very serious about like being strict towards even those who are believed to be his friends. So this is, I'm afraid, this is the beginning of an interesting development, which we cannot say now yet will bring us to what results. Yeah, so that's so, yeah.
But Sergei, isn't it also fair to say that Benya actually has very close ties to both sides of the political debate in Israel, and has been exceptionally supportive through his connections of the humanitarian effort sponsored by the Israelis in various locations, including Moldova. So there were very good reasons not to attack him earlier.
Yes, that's true, of course, and well, we have actually like we have a very dense network, and in Ukraine, the political situation and the political connections within Ukraine and with other countries is always multidimensional. Like it is like Ukrainian connections with or Ukrainian relations with Turkey or with Israel. They are on some levels they are allies, on some levels they neutrality, on some levels Ukraine can say, okay, like Turkey also has very close connections to Russia, and Israeli government has also its connections to Russia, and there are a lot of mediators on this field, and Kolomoisky was one of mediator between Kiev and Tel Aviv, and or Kiev and Jerusalem, And yes, he was important, and yes, he was very close to Zelensky, and yes, he also has his interests also outside of Ukraine. And this attack on him, with stripping him of Ukrainian citizenship, is a strong political statement. We just don't know if it will be the end of this statement or it is just the preamble to this statement.
We should revert back to the topic of the oligarchs a little later. I have a few questions in that regard. Alex, what do you think the role of Kolomoisky will be in future?
Well, yes, absolutely. So, as Sergei mentioned, back in 2019, during the Zelensky's presidential election, a lot of people have, noted a very strong link between Kolomoisky and Zelensky previously, and there were concerns that Kolomoisky would be influencing new Zelensky's administration. But a lot has changed in Ukraine in the past 3 years, and the fact that now Zelensky has decided to go ahead with this step of stripping Kolomoisky of citizenship, it clearly indicates an attempt to distance himself from Kolomoisky. This is probably linked to the United States. As we know, there are ongoing criminal investigations against Kolomoisky in the US, and Ukraine is so reliant on financial and military and material assistance from the US right now. So most probably Kolomoisky's impact and influence on Ukraine will diminish. A lot will depend on where he physically will be, or he physically is now. I honestly haven't been following the movements of Kolomoisky. I don't know whether he's in Ukraine or he left the country and is now somewhere else. But what we are clearly seeing the Zelensky administration trying to distance himself from Kolomoisky, and also to remove the most, as Sergei just mentioned, remove the most controversial figures in the administration, so that it removes the obstacles for continued Western support, particularly from the United States and the UK.
It's a very good point. Okay, well, now that we went there, we can actually immediately debate the other two, Rinat Akhmetov and Mr. Pinchuk. Now, the owner of the former two, the steel plants in Mariupol, has been accused last year, actually by the current president, that he was somewhat in cahoots with Russia. Whereas right after the invasion, he stipulated very clearly that he is not, and donated substantial amount of monies and advanced tax payments even to support state coffers, and even went as far out as to state that that there would only be peace through victory, and that a total ceasefire, including the recovery of Crimea and Donbass, and the re-establishment of the total sovereignty of Ukraine, would constitute an acceptable outcome, which is, for all the oligarchs who've spoken out of Ukraine, the staunchest support of the position of what President Zelensky has demanded and promoted. Contrast this with Kolomoisky and Pinchuk. Sergei, Alex?
I had very bad connection. I have missed the question. I'm very sorry.
No, I was just saying, if you contrast the position, which was, Rinat Akhmetov was accused last year of being in cahoots with Russia. And then he came out swinging with a baseball bat, quite literally, right after the invasion, and rejecting Russia's claims, supporting Ukrainian armed forces, advancing tax payments as prepayment to the government, in very substantial amounts, and supporting Ukraine with humanitarian aid, a complete antithesis to the position which people expected from him as a potential collaborator. So if you contrast this with other oligarchs, how do you see his position, given what has happened in Mariupol?
Yes, if I may start.
Sure.
Well, we all know that when the events in the east of Ukraine of 2014 began, Akhmetov was accused of feeding this pro-Russian insurgency, including locally, and assisting the Russian security services officers who have infiltrated cities in eastern Ukraine and took control of police and government buildings in Sloviansk, Donetsk, and other places. But what happened after 2014, after these de facto Russian proxies seized control of these areas in Donetsk and Luhansk, what happened is that Ukrainian oligarchs, including Akhmetov, have lost their economic assets held at the territories outside of the Ukrainian government control. And I think it was a lesson learned for Akhmetov that, you sow a wind and you reap a storm. And this is exactly what happened to him. Even if in spring 2014, he may have thought that supporting people who would be demanding autonomy from Kiev could potentially be beneficial to him economically and politically, including to his economic assets in the Donbass. But reality of events after summer 2014 has demonstrated that once Russia takes over some area, that this is it. No Ukrainian laws are going to be tolerated, and interests of Ukrainian businessmen such as Akhmetov are not going to be taken into account. So I think he learned it the hard way, and as a result, with this open invasion started by Russia in February 2022, he already knew that he only has to lose from Russia gaining more territory in Ukraine, and the assets which have been captured by the Russian forces from him are now fundamentally lost for him.
Yeah, his net worth has dropped massively. I mean, there's various indications of this, of course, and estimations, but essentially for him, the only possibility to regain any of his fortunes is by Ukraine retaking Mariupol and freeing it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But, a lot of these assets have been physically destroyed now, because we all know what has happened to Azovstal.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, if you look at Illich, for example, as one of the most advanced and best steel mills in the country, if you look at the quality of product which rolled out from there, none of this will come to bear quickly. The question is, what kind of recovery and what kind of potential reconstruction can be managed by people who have that background, and if and when he were to be actually involved in reconstruction. It's an interesting concept. But then again, on the other hand, he may very well have significantly better relations in order to foster a reconstruction. I think we have a question in that regard from Finance, one of our moderators and contributors. Finance.
Thank you for coming to the space. Really appreciate our educated guests here. Sorry that I'm asking a really basic question here. Do we know if these huge plants were under some sort of insurance that will be able to pay out given the situation?
I would imagine that they were, but it very much depends on the first, the type of insurance, and second, on the cover. insurance provision, very much depends on if you're looking at political violence insurance, it depends on whether it was insured under the provisions of war risk. So if it was insured under the provisions of war risk, then there should be compensation in place. But again, also, it's not publicly available information on what was the insurance cover. It's down to the insurer and the owner of the assets to establish it. But if the insurance was set up correctly and had war risk covered, under these conditions, there should be insurance payments triggered.
I was curious if any statements have been made publicly about whether they had both that kind of insurance and, sadly, got to point out, with a firm that isn't also going under because they're not located somewhere that's everything's been hit by war, so they're having stability. There might be Ukrainian insurance firms with stability issues right now. Right?
Yeah, none of these insurance policies taken out by any of the larger players in Ukraine would have been from Ukraine. They would all be in the London market.
Okay, so that's good. Yeah, if anyone sees that, I would appreciate reading it. Thank you for the question, gentlemen.
Alrighty, so let's move on a little bit from our friendly oligarchs. Unless, Ben, do you have a question in that regard, or?
Yes, just
Okay.
I checked Alexander Gershon, who's a great economist from the 20th century, who was actually born in Odessa, apparently, so a local, and he worked a lot on the way development was financed. And as a result, I was wondering to what extent, how is Ukrainian reconstruction going to be financed? And is the fight against the power of the oligarchs potentially going to make this financing suffer, local financing, and force Ukraine to rely more on foreign finance? Or is there another source of local finance that I'm not seeing?
Well, we have currently, of course, the situation when Ukraine is not able to finance all its needs out of its own finances. So, of course, Ukraine is highly dependent currently on the foreign support, including financial support. And we know that the EU provides a lot of this support. And if I'm not mistaken, like last week, it was announced like another like 500 million of this financial support, which, of course, cannot be the end, because we have currently, like, just to imagine, we have like about like 5 million people, like more than 10% of the population of displaced persons or of refugees who left the country. We have the destruction of infrastructure on the scale we have not seen in Europe since World War II. The whole cities, like Mariupol, like the city with the population of over 400,000 people, completely destroyed. And Mariupol was not only the city with all these people and the local businesses, it was one of the main producers of steel and one of the main export terminals for Ukrainian products. We know that Odessa cannot send its cargo ships to the world, and like Ukrainian exports has suffered a lot. Ukrainian agriculture, you name it. So of course Ukraine is highly dependent on this. We see that the government in Ukraine is struggling currently. The monetary situation with the currency exchange. Today, the official exchange rate for Ukrainian hryvnia, the currency, has been dropped like from 29 something hryvnia per dollar to 36 something hryvnia per dollar, and it's only an official course, but it is what Ukraine uses for as a benchmark for certain transactions. And there we have a question: if Ukrainian companies who are dependent on imported spare parts or some technologies or some services, if they are able to survive under the falling economy and exchange rate. But that is the question which doesn't have that much of tactical importance, but a lot of strategic importance, because we need to think what will happen like in 3 months, in 6 months, in 1 year. Also, when Russian army will be pushed out of Ukraine, because all the areas will need to be reconstructed and and this will cost enormous money. This money which Ukraine gets now is just money for current operations, like for paying salaries, for state employed people, for like paying interest for the national debt, etc. But it is not about reconstructing infrastructure, demining, like cleaning the areas for the life, building new cities, etc. And this will be the question where the money will come from. What we hear currently in Europe, that there are plans of creation of Ukrainian recovery fund. It is good, but if we have a benchmark of, for example, the European recovery plan, so-called Marshall Plan, Ukraine needs such plan, but it cannot take as much time as ERP too, because ERP was called into life 2 years after World War II in 1947. Ukraine will not have this time, and that's the question how fast we will act. And coming back to the very insightful statement by Alex regarding the oligarchs and their role in the war of 2014, 2020, 2021. I think we need also to think about will they survive? Like, will oligarchs survive this war? And if yes, in what form? We know that under the first years of President Zelensky in year 2019, there were attempts to start some sort of private-public partnerships with oligarchs, saying, okay, we can tolerate you as long as you don't do something toxic and destructive, and in exchange you need to invest a lot of your private money into infrastructure in your regions, because we know like what regions are important to what oligarchs, and if you want to be like to exist further, you need to support these regions with your money, like build some sort of airports, roads, factories, and do other stuff. I'm not sure that after this war the oligarchs will be able to do this, because they were not very successful in this private-public partnership in 2019. I'm not sure they will be able to do something like that in 2023, let me say. Because what we know about Ukrainian oligarchs is that mostly they are not the people who create something. The creative part of Ukrainian economy, and creative not in the sense of art, but in the sense of building, of creating additional value, of creating jobs, of creating new products, new services, didn't come from oligarchs. It didn't come from Metinvest. It didn't come like from Privatbank. It didn't come from other such companies. It came from mid-sized businesses or small-sized businesses, or from investments of foreign private companies, which brought their production lines to Ukraine, and once again enjoyed the cooperation with small and medium enterprises who were their contractors on the ground. So the oligarchs extorted additional margin from the Soviet-built plans. Okay, I understand I oversimplify it, and it's not that easy. But if we go to most cases, it was extortion of monopolistic profits, of monopolistic price, of unfair market price. It was monopolistic abuse of market power or relations to the state. It was like selling the products under too high prices or installing some energy capacities using state guarantees for purchase of this electricity for non-fair prices.